I never used to believe in ghosts. Not really, anyway. I always assumed that the flickering lights, the strange noises at night, things people swore were paranormal, were just tricks of the mind. A draft, faulty wiring, an overactive imagination. Rationality was my armor against fear. But I don't feel that way anymore. It started when I took the night shift at an office building downtown. The pay was decent and the work was easy, just some light security duties, logging reports, and making sure everything was locked up. The building was mostly empty, aside from a few overnight workers on the upper floors, but my station was in the basement. The place was old, built in the early 1900s, and had the kind of silence that pressed down on you like a heavy weight. The first few nights were uneventful. I passed the time scrolling on my phone, sipping coffee, and occasionally walking the halls to check the doors. But on my fourth night, something changed. I first noticed it in the security monitors, grainy black and white footage of the hallways. On one of the screens, a shadow moved just at the edge of the frame. At first, I thought it was one of the overnight workers, but when I checked the building's log, no one had badged in or out in hours. I leaned in closer to the screen. The shadow didn't move like a person. It almost seemed to stretch and contract, flickering as if caught between frames. And then, suddenly, it was gone. Just vanished. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I told myself it was a glitch. Cameras mess up all the time. But as the night went on, the unease grew. Around 2 a.m., I left my desk for a routine check. The building was eerily silent, save for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The air felt strangely thick, like I was walking through something unseen. As I neared the storage room, I noticed the door was slightly open. I was sure it had been locked. My breath hitched. I reached out, nudging it open with 2 fingers. The room beyond was pitch black, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Footprints. Not shoe prints, but bare, wet footprints leading from the center of the room toward the door where I stood. The sight of them filled me with a deep, primal dread. Something about them was all wrong. They were too large, the shape too distorted, like they belonged to something not quite human. I backed away and shut the door, locking it quickly. My hands were shaking as I radioed my supervisor. "Hey, Paul, has anyone else come in tonight? Maybe someone from the maintenance crew?" A pause, then, "No, just you and the third-floor guy." "Why?" I hesitated. "I think someone might be in the basement. Can you check the logs again?" There was a long silence on the other end. Then Paul said, "Hold on." I stared at the door, waiting, feeling the weight of something on the other side. Minutes stretched unbearably. Finally, Paul's voice came back, quieter this time. "There's no one else in the building." I wanted to leave right then, walk out, never come back. But I needed this job, and I couldn't exactly explain why wet footprints on a basement floor had me ready to quit. So I stayed. The rest of the night was uneventful. I finished my shift with my nerves frayed and left as soon as my replacement arrived. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in that building, that I had seen something I wasn't meant to. The next night, I almost called in sick. But pride or stupidity got the better of me, and I showed up for my shift. It was quiet at first, too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you aware of every breath, every heartbeat. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. I busied myself with my usual routine, but as the night wore on, an unnatural sense of dread settled over me, like something was watching. Then, around 3 a.m., the lights flickered. Not just a quick dimming, but a slow, deliberate pulse, as if the building itself was breathing. The monitors crackled, and the screen showing the basement hallway turned to static. And then, through the distortion, I saw it. A figure, tall, impossibly thin, standing at the far end of the hallway, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. It didn't move, didn't step forward. It just stared. Even though the footage was grainy, I knew without a doubt that it was looking directly at me. My stomach twisted into knots. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to get out of there. But I was frozen. And then the static on the screen shifted. The figure was closer. I gasped, stumbling backward. The screen flickered again. Closer still. I turned, my breath ragged, and reached for the door. But before I could move, I heard it. A whisper. Right behind me. Low, guttural, like something trying to speak through water. My skin crawled. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see what was there. Instead, I bolted from the room, sprinting up the stairs 2 at a time, not stopping until I burst out into the cold night air. I quit the next morning. I don't know what I saw in that basement. I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is still and quiet, I hear it again, that wet, rasping whisper just behind my ear, and I know it's still watching, waiting. Something about the office at night felt wrong. The endless rows of empty desks, the way the overhead lights cast long, unnatural shadows, it unsettled me. But deadlines don't wait for fear, and when my boss asked me to stay late and finish a report, I had no choice. By 10 p.m., the building was empty. Just me, the hum of my computer, and the occasional creak of the old air vents. I tried to ignore the sounds, brushing them off as the building settling. But then, the elevator dinged. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't called for the elevator, and I was sure no one else was here. Slowly, I turned my chair toward the glass wall that overlooked the hallway. The elevator doors slid open, revealing an empty cabin. I waited, breath held. Nothing happened. No footsteps, no voices. The doors remained open far longer than they should have, as if inviting me in. A cold dread settled over me. Trying to shake it off, I turned back to my screen, typing faster, eager to be done. But a minute later, the lights above me flickered, casting the room into momentary darkness. When they came back on, my monitor screen had changed. All of my work was gone. In its place was a single sentence, typed in a document I hadn't opened. "Why are you still here?" My breath hitched. I stared at the screen, my fingers frozen over the keyboard. The words didn't make sense. A prank? A virus? I moved the mouse, trying to close the document, but my cursor wouldn't respond. The words on the screen flickered, distorting, as if something unseen was trying to push through. Then the office phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the silence like a knife. I spun in my chair, staring at the phone on my desk. The screen showed no caller ID. Every nerve in my body screamed at me not to pick up, but something compelled me to reach for the receiver. I pressed it to my ear. Silence. Then a slow, ragged breath, and a whisper so faint I almost didn't hear it. "Turn around." I slammed the phone down, heart hammering. I didn't dare turn. Instead, I grabbed my bag, shut my laptop without even saving my work, and ran for the exit. The office felt colder as I moved, the air thick and suffocating. As I passed the elevator, I heard it ding again. The doors slid open. I ran faster. By the time I reached my car, I was shaking. I locked the doors, my breath coming in gasps. The office tower loomed in the rearview mirror, dark and indifferent. And just as I started the engine, my phone buzzed with a notification, a message from an unknown number. "You forgot to turn around." I never worked late again, but the story doesn't end there. The nightmares started a few days later. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that office. But it wasn't just empty. It was wrong. The walls seemed taller, the shadows darker, and there was always something lurking just out of sight. In my dreams, I'd hear the ding of the elevator, and no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape it. Then the sleep paralysis began. I'd wake up in the dead of night, unable to move, the weight of something unseen pressing down on my chest. I'd hear faint whispers in my ear, that same distorted, watery voice from the office phone. One night, I swore I felt cold fingers brushing against my arm, but when I finally managed to move, there was nothing there. I tried to convince myself it was stress, lack of sleep. But then, things started happening when I was awake. My home office computer flickered on by itself. Files on my desktop would disappear and be replaced with that same message. "Why are you still here?" My phone rang in the middle of the night, always from an unknown number. And each time when I picked up, all I heard was breathing. I changed my number, got a new laptop, even moved to a different apartment. But it didn't stop. The final straw came last week. I was walking home from a late shift at my new job, a different company, a different office. The streets were nearly deserted, just the hum of streetlights and the occasional passing car. I was almost home when I heard it. A ding, like an elevator. I froze. There were no buildings around me, no open stores, just a long, empty street. But the sound had been real. I was sure of it. Slowly, I turned around. And there it was. A single elevator stood in the middle of the sidewalk, its doors slightly open, the fluorescent light inside flickering. I took a step back, heart pounding. This wasn't possible. Elevators don't just appear on empty streets. Then from inside, I heard it. That ragged, wet whisper. "Come in." I ran. I don't know how long I ran, but when I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. I haven't left since. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it's still following me. But I do know one thing. No matter where I go, no matter what I do, eventually the elevator will find me again. I worked the night shift at a data processing firm. The job was dull, hours spent staring at spreadsheets, inputting numbers, sipping on cheap vending machine coffee to stay awake. But the pay was decent, and it was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. Our office was on the 9th floor of a 20-story building, and after 8 p.m., most of the floors were empty. Just a handful of night staff remained, scattered security guards, a janitor or two, and us, the few who had the unfortunate task of working late into the night. It started with small things, the occasional flicker of the lights, the feeling of being watched when I knew no one else was in the room. I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow shifting just outside my line of sight. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to take on a rhythmic, almost whisper-like quality. But I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Long nights, exhaustion, that was all it was. Then came the whispering. I'd be sitting at my desk, eyes blurring from staring at the screen, when I'd hear it. So faint I wasn't sure I was hearing anything at all. A soft murmur, like someone speaking just below the threshold of comprehension. One night, I finally worked up the nerve to follow the sound. I stood from my desk, scanning the dimly lit office. The whispering was constant now, an urgent murmur threading through the still air. I walked slowly, my heart pounding. It seemed to be coming from the break room. I pushed the door open, expecting to find a coworker. Maybe someone had fallen asleep with the TV on. But the room was empty, except for one thing. The coffee machine was on, steam rising from an untouched cup. The buttons blinked erratically as if someone had just used it, but I was the only one on shift that night. I stepped forward, hesitantly. My breath felt too loud in the stillness. That's when I saw it, the reflection in the microwave door. Someone was standing behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped, my pulse hammering in my ears. But there was no one there. The whispering stopped. After that, I stopped going to the break room alone. But it didn't matter. Whatever it was, it followed me. The next night, I was at my desk, trying to focus, when my computer screen flickered. The spreadsheet I had been working on vanished, replaced by a blank document. And then words began appearing on the screen. Not typed out, not like someone was controlling my computer. They just faded into existence, letter by letter. Why did you look? A chill ran down my spine. My hands were frozen on the keyboard. I couldn't move. I could only stare as the words slowly erased themselves, and then were replaced with new ones. I see you. I slammed my laptop shut and grabbed my things. I didn't care if my shift wasn't over. I needed to get out. I rushed to the elevator, jabbing the button over and over. The doors slid open with a ding, and I stepped inside. The air was stifling. As the doors began to close, I saw movement at the far end of the office. A figure, pale, blurred, as if it were flickering in and out of existence. It was watching me. The door shut and the elevator began its descent. Then it stopped. The lights went out. Total darkness. My breath came in sharp gasps as I fumbled for my phone, the small glow of the screen barely illuminating the space around me. A sound, something shifting in the darkness. The air turned ice cold, and a whisper, so close it could have been against my ear, breathed. You shouldn't have looked. The elevator jolted, and the doors slid open. I stumbled out into the lobby, nearly collapsing as I gasped for breath. The security guard at the front desk looked up from his newspaper, startled. You all right? He asked, frowning. I wanted to tell him, wanted to explain what had just happened. But when I turned back to the elevator, the lights inside were normal. No signs of anything strange. I left that night and never went back. I quit my job the next day. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment, I still hear the whispering. And I wonder, what would have happened if I had stayed?